Well, good evening and welcome to Coalition for Conservation's first event on South Australia. I'm Cristina Talaco, the chair of C4C. I'll be moderating the conversation this evening, but I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia, recognizing their connections to sea, land and community, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. South Australia is leading the nation's race to net zero, with more of its grid now powered by renewables than fossil fuels. It's home to the Big Battery. It's the largest producer of wind power in Australia. And it's also working towards unlocking similar potential in solar, geothermal and hydrogen sources. So our discussions this evening will explore opportunities for the state government and also for the private sector in the light of the recent federal government announcements by the Prime Minister, unveiling the $1 billion energy deal with South Australia to reduce cost and improve reliability of energy supplies. This deal also includes getting more gas into the market to support the increase in solar and wind power coming into the grid. So joining us tonight is our special guest, the Honourable Dan van Holst Pellekaan, South Australia's Minister for Energy and Mining, Fernando Santamaria, the Australian Managing Director at Iberdrola, and Attilio Pineri, the founder and CEO at H2U. Our panelists will be joining me in an interactive conversation first, but then I'll open questions to the audience, so please type your questions in the Q&A box. So first, it's my great pleasure to introduce the Minister. Dan was elected to Parliament as the member for Stewart in 2010, and he's held the energy and mining portfolio since June 2014. Dan, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the first time. And for our audience outside South Australia, I wonder if you could bring us up to speed on what South Australia's path to 100% renewable energy by 2030 looks like, especially what this transition will mean for local jobs and for regional development.
Thank you, Christina, and hello to everybody else who's on the panel and tuning in as well. Look, it's a big question for me to answer in a fairly succinct way. And let me start out by saying that when I talk about we, I mean our government, I mean industry, generators, consumers, regulatory bodies. There are lots and lots of organisations together pulling in the same space. But from our government's perspective, we saw ever increasing cost of electricity in South Australia over the previous years. We saw increasing blackouts, including a statewide blackout, as many people would know. And we saw, certainly in my opinion, green energy and reduced emissions being used largely for political and popular purposes. And one of the very important underlying aspects of our energy policy is that we are focused on reducing cost, reducing emissions, and increasing reliability, all of them at the same time. And I'm very happy to be criticised if somebody would think, well, Minister, you could get costs down faster if you forgot the others, or you could improve emissions or reduce emissions faster if you just concentrate on that. And yes, that's true. But we are determined to concentrate on all of those things, because while we have the imperative that people all over the world have to reduce emissions, it cannot come at the cost of consumer circumstances. And while many people are able to pay more for their electricity in return for lower emissions, most people can't, and industry certainly can't. So reduced cost, improved reliability, and reduced emissions all at once. And happy to go into this in more detail at any stage if you'd like, but the high level aspect of where we go is addressing a range of things at once with regard to the policy. So we're looking for those three things to come out, but there's not one single thing that you can do that will make all of that work. So we are very focused on interconnection with other states. We're very focused on small scale storage, large scale storage. We're very focused on demand management. We have an enormous amount of investment in trials at the moment. We're very focused on working with partners, working with the existing generators who have gas generators that will need working in South Australia for a long time still, working with new participants like Iberdrola, and fantastic to have Fernando here, What's happening at Port Augusta, for example, is not necessarily new technology, but it is a new investment in wind and solar, and working with H2U and Attilio in stuff that we actually haven't got in Australia yet, but it's coming. So we're trying to work across the board, not sort of picking philosophical approaches, but very focused on getting outputs. So the last thing to say towards net 100% renewable generation by 2030. This is not a goal or an aspirational target. This is something we're going to do. Every day of the week, I turn language around in our department from our target of to know our intention of. And we will do that working with all of these partners. We'll do it particularly with interconnection, which comes to jobs, comes to projects. We will be very pleased at times to bring electricity into South Australia through a new interconnector with New South Wales, as we are already with an interconnector with Victoria. But we will export far, far more renewable energy through that interconnector into New South Wales, a state that has far different weather patterns to South Australia, much more different weather patterns to South Australia than Victoria does. And as we progress from less gas over time to more renewables over time, we will also support the eastern states progress for less coal to gas and more renewables. So we will be supporting our state and supporting the other states. We currently have about 40% of our energy produced from gas. In 2025, AEMO tells us it'll only be about 22% gas. But we will free up that gas for use in other states instead of coal. So trying to help ourselves and trying to help the rest of Australia as well. So hopefully that's a useful summary to kick things off, Christina.
Very useful, and it seems extremely exciting as well. I'm sure in your portfolio since 2014, do you consider this is probably the busiest time for you? And in terms of reducing emissions, as you mentioned, still providing reliable energy and also reducing costs. Out of those three, what has been the most challenging for you?
Oh, look, they're all challenging, and things are going very well in South Australia, but you're never out of the woods, and I don't want to be alarmist, but you're only ever an hour away from a blackout that you don't see coming if you're not concentrating on all of those things. Reliability of the grid is probably the answer to that question. There are so many things going on, so many moving parts. We've gone, from 21 years ago with the installation of our first wind farm in South Australia, first large wind farm in South Australia, to now having 60% of our grid supplied by renewable energy, and managing that without having blackouts. And we've not had one forced blackout because of load shedding in South Australia in the last 3 and a bit years. That's a real challenge, because you have a bit more time to work on emissions, and you have a bit more time to work on costs coming down, and we're doing well in both of those. But reliability of the grid, you've got your short, medium, and long-term obligations, but a short-term problem can pop up anytime. So I think that's probably the answer to the question.
Absolutely. We'll come back to you in a minute. I'll just introduce our next panelist, Fernando Santamaria. Fernando is the manager of Iberdrola Australia, which is one of the world's largest renewable energy company, and they have acquired Australia's Infigen Energy. They operate more than 800 megawatts of solar, wind, and storage batteries in the country across a significant portfolio of projects. And that includes what Dan mentioned, the Port Augusta Energy Renewable Park in South Australia. Fernando, thank you for coming and joining us. So could you please tell us a little bit about Iberdrola, Infigen, and about this unique project in Port Augusta and what it means for South Australia and the nation?
Well, thanks, Christina and Coalition for Conservation for this kind invite. It's a pleasure to be here with the Minister, Attilio, and everyone attending the webinar. Iberdrola, as you described, it's a global energy company. We're one of the biggest companies in that space. something like 20 years ago, we decided to transition into a more sustainable energy model. So we are proud to be one of the first companies to make that transition. And that led us to quite significant renewable footprint with 32 gigawatts of generation. We operate also in the transmission distribution space in other countries, and we have roughly like 100 million people getting electricity from us. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, our footprint. We thought Australia, and South Australia in particular, was a great place to start our journey in this market. We found a really nice story behind the Port Augusta Renewable Energy Park, obviously located in Port Augusta. It's true, the minister mentioned that it's not new technology, it's wind and solar, but it's the concept of the hybrid idea of just getting both technologies under the same umbrella makes the project exciting. It's 317 megawatts, so the size it's considerable, and it gives that benefit of you have the wind profile, the solar profile, and somehow both together make a very nice output. That was our first investment decision in the market. This project is roughly in the middle of the construction. 5 wind turbines have been erected. Anyone passing by that region will see the construction site moving well. But also in 2020, we reached a friendly agreement with Infigen Energy, which is a very well-known player in the Australian market. They operate roughly 700 megawatts of renewable energies. They also have some gas peakers assets to firm that energy, and also storage batteries. Just in South Australia, they have roughly 300 megawatts. So together with Port Augusta, will be in the 600 megawatt range, 1 battery in Lake Bonny and a gas peaker. And just coming back to the question about the trilemma of cost, reliability, and emission, we've seen the cost, obviously, in those 20 years transition being reduced dramatically. I think the levelized cost of wind and solar right now, it's simply impressive and improving. When you're able to put up portfolios, as we are doing in South Australia, you can diversify your risk into different assets. And even if the energy is not correlated, that gives you a well-balanced exposure in terms of your generation. And obviously the emissions, we're still very positive that going renewable, it's not only the future, it's the present. And we think that everyone is embracing that idea. And we're really pleased that South Australia has been leading that bunch for many years. And we're really proud to be doing business there.
Thanks, Fernando. Just out of curiosity, but what was the motivation for Iberdrola to come to Australia, invest here, and when did it start?
Probably it's easier to say, why not Australia? We've been very focused in America, the US, Mexico, Brazil, and Europe. Those have been our, let's say, core markets for years. But obviously, Australia has many positives. One, it's obviously it has an amazing wind and solar resource, massive land, and also a transition to happen. So we felt we could add value in that process and bring our global expertise and experience to learn from the challenges, but also help in that process that it's happening. That's been pretty much the main reasons.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce our third panelist, Attilio Pineri, the co-founder and CEO of H2U, which is the leading developer of green ammonia projects in Australia. And most recently, they signed an MOU with Germany's energy giant RWE to develop green hydrogen trading scheme between Australia and Germany. So Attilio, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I'm really interested in hearing about H2U and what this big project with the Germans mean for Australia and for South Australia. You're muted, Attilio.
Must be better now.
Much better.
Christina, thanks for having me and inviting me to this event, and thanks for your colleague. Thanks to your colleagues at the Coalition for Conservation to creating this event, but the series, we've attended a number of them. They're really interesting and engaging. And also, it's a pleasure to be here again with Mr. Holst Pellekaan and with Fernando to discuss some shared interest around renewable energy developments, in particular in South Australia. Look, so our company has been very fortunate to really, if you want, grow up at the right time with the hydrogen industry in Australia, and we owe a lot of that to our good fortune or interest in developing a project in South Australia. As the Minister has pointed out, South Australia is seeing this enormous transformation in regard to its energy supply. It's gone from a crisis situation in 2016, which was related to actually a weather event, to setting up systems and capabilities for allowing what is now actually the highest degree globally in any economy of variable renewable energy integration into the grid. I think there was a statistic that came out last year, 2019, where effectively South Australia was second only to Denmark in having about 55% renewables into the grid. I think we're shooting for 70%. Now, in that, South Australia becomes this very interesting lab globally for what can we do on the basis of having a large base of renewables in how we manage the grid, but also beyond that, how do we attract new investment and new activity? And really that's where hydrogen fits. The idea that you can use abundance of renewable energy to also start storing energy in another form, being hydrogen, but hydrogen being used as the basis of a number of value chains, from fuel to an application in power generation or shipping sector or mobility more in general, or industrial feedstock to produce ammonia, for example. And then other hydrogen or ammonia being used also to develop potentially, or not potentially, but to develop a new export market. So in that context, we have a project in South Australia which is aiming to effectively deploy initially 100 megawatt of electrolyzers. The project is located immediately north of Whyalla, very close to the Port Bonython, existing Port Bonython facilities in the northern part of the Eyre Peninsula. And then it's designed to grow to 1.5 gigawatt. The basic idea of the project is that will be one of the first applications of industrial scale electrolysis plant for producing hydrogen from renewable energy and then water. So the hydrogen will be effectively extracted from the water by applying renewable energy to this process called electrolysis, and then using the hydrogen to also produce a secondary product, ammonia, which will be effectively produced by combining with the hydrogen produced by electrolysis, the nitrogen from the air. These two products are poised to really change a lot of industries going forward. There's a lot of focus in smaller mobility applications for direct applications of hydrogen, but also there is an increasing focus on very large supply chains being established for either supplying ammonia as a substitute fuel in power generation operations. We're talking about very large coal power plants in Japan, particularly, or other type of gas turbine power plants in Singapore, Korea, but also as a key tool for the shipping sector to decarbonize their operations. So in that context, we're progressing this project, which is now in the implementation stage. We just announced about a month and a half ago, having appointed Worley, so a local engineering contractor, to develop the detailed design of the facility, and as you pointed out, with introduce RWE as a project partner, which is together with other project partners from Japan, most notably Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, is looking to source green hydrogen from the project to supply some of the early import terminal developments in Germany, where there is actually a program being established to import the equivalent of 1 gigawatt of electrolyzers over the next 10 years through a government-sponsored import program.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a huge interest from the Europeans, including Germany, in importing hydrogen in the future from Australia. So then how does that, I mean, I think that Australia could become obviously a renewables powerhouse in the Southern Hemisphere, exporting a lot of renewable technologies and energy overseas. How is South Australia placed in the sense that is this export market in your radar, and do you have plans for expanding your export? Because you could almost become or take the place that WA has traditionally held with fossil fuel exports. Is that something that your government is planning?
Yes, Christina, we are very, very focused on that opportunity. Other states around the country are focused on that as well, but we see ourselves as having a huge advantage with regard to the production of green hydrogen, green ammonia. Partnering with Atilio and H2U is a key part of that for us. We are blessed with sun and wind and space and relatively cheap land. We've got a lot of those natural advantages. It might sound a bit strange for me to say this, but I'm very happy for other jurisdictions to concentrate on brown hydrogen. It will not be where we end up. Let them start with that. That's terrific. And the reason I say that is because we also, as well as production, we need to actually facilitate the development of a hydrogen consumption economy as well. And so the sooner people can get their hands on some hydrogen and start to use it, and importantly start to invest, whether it be household appliances or whether it be, you know, massive large industrial plants and equipment, we do need to get organizations consuming hydrogen. But in the long run, it is really green hydrogen that we're very interested in. And even looking at Tasmania, which is focused in the same direction, you know, it's much easier, much easier. And as Fernando knows, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's much easier to build new wind and solar generation, to put the energy into your electrolyzers, or in fact your desalination plants, and then your electrolyzers. Much easier to do that than it is to build a new hydroelectric dam. You know, that can take 20, 30 years to get all of the clearances required for that sort of thing. So we are very focused on that, and we're engaging with a wide range of organizations, some of which are, you know, Asia Pacific countries which may well be customers to us. And people think immediately of Japan and South Korea, highly industrialized, highly energy intensive, you know, countries, but they don't have the capacity to produce the green hydrogen themselves. They're looking for partners. But we're also engaging with people in North America and Europe, countries and companies that may not, in fact, I'd say almost, you know, probably not be trade partners for us, but we're sharing our information. There's a great deal of collaboration. You know, and our MOU with the Port of Rotterdam is a good example of that. We might be able to export hydrogen to Rotterdam, and that would be fantastic. But they need to engage at the moment with jurisdictions that are learning and developing to become hydrogen producers. We need to engage with jurisdictions which are already highly industrialized and have the distribution capacity, and we need to learn from them the types of things that they need and the things that they can contribute. Now, whether what we do at the moment with the Port of Rotterdam turns into an export opportunity, or whether it just turns into a good partnership and down the track they might acquire their hydrogen from somebody else through the learnings that they get from us, and we might sell our hydrogen to somebody else with the learnings that we get from them. That sort of collaboration is very important, and we're very focused on becoming a hydrogen producer and consumer.
Thank you, but I understand, and I could be wrong, and this is a question for the three of you to answer. But it seems to be there's less capital outlay for green hydrogen projects compared to other types of hydrogen projects, right? I read the research recently for Cornwall inside Australia indicating that a hydrogen plant that could operate in South Australia, hypothetically, this summer could be very profitable, even at a $2 per kilo. But how far are we actually in reality from being able to produce green hydrogen in Australia under the $2 mark? And are there any roadblocks to that? What could maybe policy help with in that sense?
Well, let me give a short answer, and then perhaps it's Attilio who's really the most informed of the three of us on this topic. Yes, there's plenty that we can do. $2 a kilogram is not out of reach. We're not there yet, but it's not out of reach. And there are other jurisdictions looking to or potential consuming jurisdictions looking to get down to $1. But like all things, you've got to get started. And Attilio's talking about a 100 megawatt electrolyzer and then moving on from there. Interesting to put that in context. Right now in South Australia, we have the largest hydrogen electrolyzer in the nation. It is 1.25 megawatts. But that will grow exponentially. We're focused on using that to put 5 and then 10% hydrogen into existing gas reticulation system in partnership with AGIG. So you attack this in many different ways. Start off small, but it will snowball and grow very, very quickly. But it's not until you get that growth that you get your costs down. And perhaps, Christina, it's appropriate time for me to hand over to Attilio, who knows a lot more than I do about this particular question.
Thank you.
So, thank you, Minister. I'll try to do justice. But so the basic thing is that we have, and also I think Fernando can confirm that, is the benefit of a place such as South Australia is that it actually benefits from a combination of solar and wind. And the experience that is available in South Australia in developing these plants means that there is a supply chain capability to deploy larger and larger plants. For example, the one that Iberdrola is developing, is already building, is a step up compared to the scale of the projects that have been deployed this far in South Australia. With that come very significant economies of scale, and together with overall technology learning, where wind now is a very mature technology with larger wind turbines, is coming down to price points that can support the goal of getting hydrogen, which at the end of the day relies on the input electricity and the input electricity costs as the main cost driver towards that $2 a kilogram goal. And as the minister pointed out, even potentially going below that. In our case, we are seeing already for the 100 megawatt plant a price point which I cannot disclose, but it's actually very close to that $2 a kilogram mark. So meaning it's below 3, and is the result of being able to engage with players on the renewable energy side that work in the South Australian context, have had the experience of operating within a renewables dominated part of the grid, and within that understand the value of flexibility that technologies such as the batteries or the hydrogen as users of this renewable electricity alongside with the traditional users of the grid can provide to the renewable energy operators to really integrate in a cost-effective and profitable manner the renewable energy assets into the grid. Going forward, again, to put things into context, 100 megawatt plant in South Australia, which is what we're trying to develop, effectively becomes a very significant addition to the demand in South Australia as we have it today, which averages around the 1.5 gigawatt mark, so 1,500 megawatt. So as we want to grow our plant, we're planning for something along the lines of a 1.5 gigawatt of electrolysis plant. So this demand is entirely additional to the demand that is already into the South Australian market today. And so what that creates is an opportunity to manage even better additional renewables into the system. And again, with scale, it comes out cost effectiveness, not just for the hydrogen production, but for all of the grid users. But also the other thing which is really interesting is the flexibility that the electrolyzers bring, because it's what we call a dispatchable technology. So they can be effectively ramped up or ramped down very fast, but also they could be used like an interruptible load at any time. So if there is a need to reduce load into the system because renewables are coming down, having a large amount of very flexible demand into the system will be another lever in the ability of the South Australian system to really self-manage, but also could be a very good lever in helping South Australian-based generators in deciding when and how prioritizing, for example, exports into the eastern states, so New South Wales in particular with the new interconnector, and vice versa when power could be imported into the state to support this additional demand. It's really, it rounds up the palette of tools that is available to the South Australian market to work with. In parallel to that, what comes with $2 a kilogram, which I think is probably the most important element here, it means that not only we're in a position to deliver cost-effective fuel substitutes to a domestic market, we're already talking about cost-effectiveness with projects such as the one that the Minister described for the injector into the gas grid, or for mobility applications within Australia around the $5 a kilogram mark. But with $2 a kilogram, there's a whole series of new market opportunities that unlock, including the production of industrial feedstocks, particularly ammonia, but also methanol, that could be used for manufacturing processes onshore, but also can be used as vectors, so means of delivering hydrogen or clean energy offshore to export. The real prize associated with that is not only this is demand which is additional to the existing demand on the grid, these are jobs and economic activities which are entirely additional to the current industrial structure of the Australian economy in general, and then the South Australian in particular. Today, ammonia is also primarily used for fertilizers or explosives or chemical input into various processes. South Australia is today a net importer, meaning that this product is actually delivered into South Australia from the eastern states, particularly from Newcastle or Brisbane. Will find itself in a situation where not only would have this product to satisfy the needs of the industrial processes within South Australia, or be in a position to export to other states or to export to overseas customers. And there's a very, very large market developing for that.
Thank you. Fernando, would you like to add something to that?
Oh, thanks, Christina. Yeah, I mean, again, it's been a few really active years for us. We follow the hydrogen evolution very closely. We're very active in many markets. We're indeed have a partnership in Europe for an 800 megawatt facility to supply clean hydrogen. We fully agree with the opportunity to increase demand and help decarbonize other industries. In terms of cost, yeah, what I can say, we found South Australia has all the ingredients in terms of energy resource. We found really, really windy places and great sun. That's one of the reasons why we found wind and solar in the north of the Spencer Gulf was ideal. Again, the technology is getting to a point where the cost it's really, really competitive with the new solutions, wind turbines, new panels. So I think the renewable industry, it's ready to deliver really, really competitive energy. And again, absolutely excited about seeing other ways to increase demand. So it's not only about bringing through interconnection to other states, but also create that industry locally. So yeah, I've been following Attilio progress and for some years now. Yeah, it's really good that this is coming to real plan and a specific project. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to open to the Q&A, but before I do that, I'll just ask Dan and both of you, with the coming budget, the federal budget, is there anything that you think could be included there that could even help even more South Australia, aside the $1 billion deal that they've already announced? And as well as the budget, what are the policies, or at federal level, is there anything that can help South Australia, which is doing so much at state level already, Dan?
Well, as you've just mentioned, I mean, we have just reached a pretty significant agreement with the federal government, $660 million of federal government money and $422 million of state government money, which actually contributes into South Australia's commitment from the federal government, money towards some of our energy projects, well in excess of our population share of national expenditure. So it may not be appropriate for me to be asking for too much more just at this point in time. We're pleased. And in fact, I should point out, Tasmania and New South Wales have also reached similarly beneficial agreements as South Australia has just done. With regard to policy, I think we are seeing the federal government grasp opportunities now in a way that we haven't seen previously, which is good. They've been very cautious. They've been very circumspect about taking steps forward. But certainly the support that we're getting from the federal government at the moment is extremely positive and extremely welcome. So to your question about the budget, now's not the time for me to be asking for anything extra for South Australia from the budget. With regard to policy, I'd be very pleased to see the federal government continue in the direction that it's been taking over the last few months. We are leading in South Australia, and we talk about that in a very positive way. But to be really blunt, we are leading in South Australia because we've got some problems that other states don't have as well. We're leading because we have absolutely no choice but to lead, otherwise we'll sink. So, we find ourselves in this situation, and we're happy to be where we are, but we're in a challenging situation. And so, for example, Attilio was talking about demand. In fact, Fernando mentioned it as well. One of the biggest challenges we have at the moment is net negative demand in the middle of the day, where we are close to having more electricity going into the grid than coming out of it. Now, that's because we've achieved a great deal, and again, the we is lots of us, but it's a problem we cannot leave unsolved. It's not about markets, it's not about politics, it's about physics and engineering. So support from the federal government on interconnection and things like that is certainly extremely welcome.
Thanks. I might move on to the questions. There's lots on the Q&A box here. We start with Professor Andrew Blaker's question to you, Dan. Electrification of land transport, EVs, will add 40% to electricity demand, all of which will be met with solar and wind, and remove about 18% of emissions. What is South Australia doing to rapidly and strongly promote EV uptake?
Yes, well, we actually released our electric vehicle plan not too long ago, a few months ago, and it's fundamental to what we're doing. Every time you talk about one thing, you wish you talked about something else as well, but don't want to sort of take up too much of everybody's time. We have a chicken and egg situation in South Australia, no different to any other jurisdiction. People are not comfortable contemplating seriously electric vehicle purchases until they're confident in the recharging network. And of course, nobody can invest in a recharging network until there's enough vehicles getting around to make it pay. So we put $18.3 million towards this problem, and we have tenders which are sort of we're working through at the moment to partner with private industry to establish a statewide fast charging electric vehicle network. We will put taxpayers' money towards this initially, and then that network will transition into private hands over years. Interestingly, people are very cautious about electric vehicles until they know they've got the network across the entire state, when in actual fact, most people who will purchase an electric vehicle will not travel across the entire state, but we need to make it possible that they could, in the same way as most people who purchase petrol and diesel cars don't travel across the entire state. But quite understandably, they need to know that they could if they want to. We're also very focused on optimizing in a very practical way the use of electric vehicles as mobile batteries. This is not new, this is not unique to South Australia. Everybody is focused on that at the moment, but what we are doing is investing in making sure that we can do it properly, making sure that there's a good pathway for people who want to purchase electric vehicles. And then the last thing, in a very short summary of it, is we're committing our state government fleet, of vehicle purchases. Every single time a vehicle is renewed, an electric vehicle must be considered whether it's fit for purpose. Now, we're not suggesting that every vehicle will swap over. We might have the fisheries department towing heavy boats. An electric vehicle at this point in time is not going to be right for them. But thousands and thousands of our small passenger vehicles will be right for electric vehicles, and the cost of them is coming down every 6 months. They're getting cheaper and cheaper. So we're using our purchasing capacity to help drive demand for vehicles, to help push the cost of them down. We're working on making sure that we can optimize the use of them as mobile batteries to support our whole grid. And we are using taxpayers' money to develop a statewide fast charging network.
Thank you, Dan. And there's a couple of questions still for you here. One is what your thoughts are on gas. When do you think it will be phased out of the NEM? And maybe you can also talk a little bit about pump hydro storage in South Australia. What's the progress on that?
Okay, so gas will be with us for decades and decades to come. There are some things that we need gas for, and we will consume less and less gas in South Australia over time. And as I mentioned before, that spare gas will be used in the eastern states to help them transition away from coal. And I'm very, very comfortable with that. Fast start gas generators like the Barker Inlet power station that was commissioned about a year ago by AGL at Torrens Island is exactly the type of gas generation that we need to fit into the market. And ironically, some people will say to me, Dan, how could you even talk positively about gas in any way whatsoever? But ironically, the fast start gas that can enter and leave the market within just a few minutes actually enables more and more renewable energy to be developed, because there are times where we need to fill the gaps very, very quickly when sun and wind and small and large scale storage and demand management and other things can't do it all on its own. We do need gas generation to jump into the market, to operate more efficiently. These new generators get less gas when they're running, and they run for shorter amounts of time. So overall, we are using less gas, which is positive for the environment. But these gas generators can do some things that no other type of generator can do just at the moment. So gas will be with us for a long time, less and less of it. And as I mentioned a couple of times, gas in the eastern states, and this is for other ministers to talk about their jurisdictions, is an opportunity to transition away from coal and then do what we're doing now, which is transition away from gas to more and more renewables. AEMO tells us that in 2025, we will be 78% renewable energy for our electricity generation in South Australia and only 22% gas. So I'm very comfortable with that trajectory, less and less all the time, but certainly I would never advocate just trying to step off a cliff and cut off gas straight away. Very quickly to pumped hydro, I would love to have a pumped hydro project get up in South Australia. Please, nobody buy shares or invest or do anything based on that comment. But it makes such good sense with our terrain. Again, another opportunity in the Upper Spencer Gulf, which is where Fernando, or at least his new wind and solar plant is, southeast for the Infigen projects, and Attilio is, and where I live, I mean, it's huge opportunities there. I see probably the opportunity for one pumped hydro project in South Australia, if we're fortunate, perhaps not more. And again, please don't make investment decisions based on that. But pumped hydro works on arbitrage. Buy electricity cheap, pump water up. When price is high, let it go and generate electricity. by definition, as soon as you have one of those types of projects operating, the low electricity cost jumps a bit, the high electricity cost drops a little bit, and so the margin for a second or a third one to do the same, or at least to get the same commercial opportunities, is reduced. But it would be terrific to have a pumped hydro project in South Australia. But as other panelists know far better than I do, it's incredibly difficult. It takes a long time to get a new electricity generator up for all of the different things that you have to do. So it's not easy, but myself and our government is very positive about the possibility of pumped hydro.
Thanks, Dan. There's a few technical questions, and I might ask the three at the same time, and possibly Fernando and Attilio will be well placed to respond. Fernando, how much wind power is produced at night over a period of 1 year, if you know the answer to that?
I mean, obviously it depends on your wind farm, and that's the beauty of picking the right location and finding the wind that it correlates to the demand. That's what we found in Port Augusta. We have a pretty nice peak in generation in the evening, where normally the demand is higher. So again, it depends on location and the type of wind, and obviously the value you capture with that specific site. In that project, the hybrid project of Port Augusta, we have something like 900 gigawatt hour roughly per annum. I don't know from the top of my head how much we will produce at night, obviously not the solar component, but again, the wind profile, it's lower at night than in the peak times of the day.
Yeah. And in terms of hydrogen, how much energy does 2 kilo of hydrogen produce in comparison with oil, for example?
Okay, so from the hydrogen with 2 kilograms, you've got roughly the ability to deliver between, in just energy terms, if you were to just burn it, what you deliver with 7 to 8 liters worth of petrol. So if we can compare to petrol, or 6 liters worth of diesel. But actually, hydrogen using a mobility application also leverages a more efficient technology to deliver power to the wheel, which is the fuel cell, which is roughly, twice as much efficient as an engine, a petrol engine is today, or more, something like 30% more efficient than a diesel engine is today. So roughly speaking, you actually with 2 kilograms of hydrogen, if we talk about diesel, which probably is the best applications in mobility, you're delivering the equivalent of effective between 18 and 20 liters worth of diesel. So in terms of actual power delivered to the wheels. And so with that in mind, hydrogen is a very good element. The other side of the equation, though, is how much energy do you need in order to produce 2 kilograms of hydrogen, which it goes back to that demand that you can create into the grid, which is roughly 100 kilowatt hours to do that. So it's an interesting element where you're transforming energy from electricity to another form, and you have the ability to deliver to mobility users, but also you can use it back to produce electricity. The efficiency in that case is not as good as a battery, but hydrogen as a fuel can be stored over very long term. So there's an element of energy security that gets delivered by having this gaseous form of energy stored, or of clean energy stored, I should say. Yeah.
Thank you. And then someone's asking whether South Australia has biogas digesters on any or all of its sewage treatment plants.
Yes, we do, but not many of them at all. We certainly do at the SA water plants down at Glenelg, which is a very significant wastewater facility down there. And in fact, we have an interesting pilot plant working with a company called 1414 Degrees, where that energy then is used to heat silicon. They've got a silicon storage project at Glenelg, which is a suburb of Adelaide. And interestingly, for those who may not know, 1,414 degrees Celsius is the temperature at which silicon becomes a liquid, which is where that company got their name from. So there's a little bit of that sort of thing happening, but I'd have to say very little at this stage. But there certainly are people that are keen to try and prove it up. And you know, we have opportunities in the southeast of the state with regard to pine plantation thinnings and trimmings being used potentially into bioenergy plants. There are people looking at that with regard to stubble from crops and a range of different things, but it's very, very early days for those things in South Australia compared to harnessing wind and sun.
Thanks, Dan. And still for you, have you looked at any of the energy storage systems that don't require lithium or lots of land and water like pumped hydro? What do you think of gravity batteries, air liquid nitrogen batteries, and liquid metal batteries?
Well, look, I'm not familiar with all of those, but yes, we have looked at some of them, and we've had mixed success. You know, we had a hydraulic energy storage program in a closed mine, an closed underground mine down near Strathalbyn, south of South Australia, which the company and the government put a fair bit of resource into trying to make it work, where they were going to pump compressed air into a sealed cavern to lift water and then release it, which was one of the examples that you used, or that was provided. We've looked at silicon storage, we've looked at molten salt storage, we're looking at graphite storage, all heat-based types of energy storage, and a range of others. One of the things we're doing as a government, and it's fair to say that the previous Labor government tried to do the same, is we're not picking we're not picking technologies. We're not trying to pick winners. Where proponents come forward with projects which you know, seem worth risking taxpayers' money to support, and by risk I mean because we believe that there'll be a positive outcome. We're looking at those sorts of things, but we're not able to do that for all of the different types of projects that come to us. We don't have endless supplies of taxpayers' money to invest in these trials. So we really are trying to put our money where we believe the results have the highest return. And small scale and large scale storage are right at the top of those projects from our perspective.
One last question in two parts for you, Dan. A decade ago, South Australia was overwhelmingly fossil fuel powered, but a majority of South Australia's power demand now comes from renewables. So what was the impetus for that change, and how did South Australia found bipartisan agreement on the renewables transition?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting and a complicated question. In some ways, it happened organically. I mean, every responsible person in the world knows that we need to produce less waste. We need to pollute less. We just need to do that, but not at the cost of making things unacceptable from a consumer's perspective. So there's a move in that direction across the world. As I did say before, and I believe this, not to try and be uncharitable, but the previous government, in my opinion, did look at the politics of renewable energy and find it very, very attractive and start to move in that direction, but imposed unreasonable costs on consumers. We started to try and bring those things together. When you talk about bipartisan support, I think the most accurate way to say that, in my experience over the last 11 years as an MP, and much of that as a shadow minister and now a minister, is we went to the last election broadly speaking saying, look, everything that the previous government was doing, half of it we were comfortable with and supportive of, half of it we didn't think was constructive. So our energy policies very, very openly and very publicly said, see that half that you're doing, we'll continue doing that. See, that other half, we'll get rid of it and we'll replace it with other policies that we've got. And you know, it's a broad simplification, but essentially that is what we've done. We've continued with things that the previous government did, which have been tremendous. But there was a lot of it that we were critical of at the time. We've ditched it and we've moved on. And we're trying to have a multi-pronged energy policy approach to address those three key things. I'm not sure that it would be accurate to say that the now opposition finds themselves in a bipartisan position, but we're determined. We are going to keep moving down the path, less emissions, greater reliability, and lower costs, using the very best proposals that industry, technology, academia, the regulatory bodies bring to us. The very best of them, we're grabbing with both hands and working with all of those organisations to progress.
Well, congratulations, Dan. I think South Australia has one of the most ambitious agenda on emissions reduction, and you've been doing a great job. Before we go, because we've only got a couple of minutes left, I would like to invite now David Nixon, who's our Coalition for Conservation Director here in New South Wales, to say a few words and a vote of thanks to all of you.
Yes, what a great session. Yeah, South Australia has got the same issues that everywhere else has. You know, we've always had blackouts, you know, the cost of electricity, and I think I've been hearing those for 30 years. But what you've actually done, and I think you've captured very well, is you've actually created an environment for investment. You've actually created something, and yeah, I like it when people kept asking you, have you tried this, have you tried this? And there was an answer for every one of them. Yes, we've had a look at that, we've got a little bit of that, we've done a little bit. So it's just not about the hydrogen, it's not about the big batteries, which I actually put a bid in for, by the way, and missed out, but that's a different story. So I think that was great that you've actually got the environment right for investment. And there's some other governments around the place that we'd actually like to get them to do the same. It's great that we're getting companies like Iberdrola, who have been in this space for 20 years, that there's enough actually confidence in our governments and what you're actually doing to actually to get a company with that much experience to say, yes, Australia is a place that we're actually happy to actually come in and actually and invest. And I think that's a compliment to you. Some very interesting things from the H2U, something about the dispatchable power. And I can see that we're building gas stations still at the moment because of that dispatchable power issue. And if they actually get taken over by green ammonia, hydrogen, etc., we've still got the same outcome, but we've actually got a clean solution to it. It's pleasantly surprised that the $2 target is a lot closer. I know we don't like targets in this country, but it's a really lot closer than actually what that I actually suspected it was, and that's actually great because that says this is actually going to be very successful. Probably just round up by saying that it's great to see that you're driving the clean energy future. I know you've got a battle on their hands with two other states in the nation, in New South Wales and Tasmania, on who are doing the best job. And the greatest thing about all that is they're all Liberal governments and Liberal state governments. So congratulations all of you, and thank you everyone.